My name is Ken Schull. I'm the owner of Kendall Investigations in Knoxville, Tennessee. I was fortunate enough to be hired by J. Edgar Hoover, actually, into the FBI in 1971. In 1975, I entered a special agent class, the academy in Quantico. When I graduated from there, I was assigned to the Washington field office of the FBI, where I worked criminal cases, foreign counterintelligence cases, and I actually worked undercover for about 10 years. Secret Service, FBI, NSA, CIA, DOD, DIA, all the government agencies use polygraph extensively. Tens of thousands of polygraph tests that are done every year by government agencies. A lot of people believe that polygraph is used just to determine somebody's guilt, when in fact it's used just as often to prove somebody's truthfulness. There are many examples where the polygraph has been used to either clear somebody's name and give investigative direction to a case, or to put more evidence in the field that this person may have done it. And focus on this person a little bit more if they can't pass the polygraph test. One of those cases that I think of particularly was we knew in the FBI that we had a spy working for the Soviets and was providing classified information to the Soviets. Some of our programs between the CIA and the FBI were compromised. So we knew we had a leak somewhere. They decided that it was a man at the CIA by the name of Brian Kelly. That's who they believed was the spy. He worked at the CIA. He had access to 4 out of the 5 programs that were compromised. They didn't know how he had information about the 5th, but we knew we had access to 4 of those. So they had his house bugged, they had his car bugged, everything. They couldn't catch this guy because he was not active. So they had to devise a plan of how they could catch this guy. They knew that if they gave him access to such highly classified information, that he would be tempted too much, it'd be worth too much to the Soviets for him not to pass it on. So they formed a task force, and Brian Kelly was on that task force to review this sensitive information. And everybody knows that whenever you get read in on something like that, the first thing you have to do is take a polygraph test. So they knew that he would be expecting to take a polygraph test, so they wanted me to test him because of my education. So I did. They said, we know he's going to fail, but we want you to tell him that he passed, because we don't want him to be suspicious at all of what we're doing. So I tested him, and I came out of the room and I said, listen guys, you got the wrong guy. This guy's innocent. Nobody would believe me. Nobody. They said he, quote, beat my test. They know he's the spy, so they went ahead and put him in to this situation with this information. And he still didn't contact the Soviets, and then they found out later on that they did have the wrong guy, and it was one of our own people. In the case of John Wilson, I got the phone call to be involved in this case, and was asked if I would be willing to test John on a couple of issues related to college admission. I soon found out that there was more than one issue, and the reason there was more than one issue is because Mr. Wilson wanted to be able to prove so many different things, and usually that's not the case. He had so many things that he wanted to prove, and unfortunately you can't combine those kinds of questions in one test. You can't ask a question about this and about this and about this, because in the polygraph test, if you fail one question, you fail the whole question, the test. So you have to stay focused on one area. So because he had so many things that he wanted to prove that he was telling the truth to, we had to separate all those issues out and test on each individual idea that he had. So I went into the test, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 issues that we were going to test, perhaps. We'd take a break between the test. John would come back and say, hey, I thought 2 more things I want you to ask me. Now keep in mind too that he didn't know whether he was passing these tests or not. I didn't stop after the test and say you passed that test or you failed that test. He had no idea. He was so confident that he was passing every test that he didn't even ask. And that's one clue that we look for sometimes in polygraph exam. When the person gets out of the chair and the first thing they say is, did I pass? That's a clue, because if you're telling the truth, you know if you pass or not. You don't have to ask that question. John never asked, never asked. The accuracy of the polygraph exam really depends on the background, education, and experience of the examiner that's conducting the polygraph test. I called upon somebody to do a quality control review of these polygraph charts that is probably, I would say, the most respected person in the entire world in the field of polygraph. He is highly, highly respected, has probably done as much, if not more, research on polygraph than anybody in the world. He used to work at the CIA, was the head of the CIA's program. He was deputy director of the Department of Defense polygraph school that all federal agents train at. He is an incredible guy. He reviewed each one of these cases and found no fault in any of the testing procedures, and agreed with the call of no deception indicated. I even then went another step forward and had an independent review done by a former FBI supervisor at headquarters. And her name is Lori Warren, and she did the same kind of review on each and every one of these polygraph tests that Mr. Wilson took. And she agreed with my call, she agreed with the other person's call, and then she and I had run the OSS polygraph scoring algorithm that's included in the software that we use for the Lafayette polygraph instrument. It's an objective scoring system, and it also agreed with all of our calls as well. And it should be noted too that when these people do the scoring of these charts, they don't know whether the person's passed or failed. You know, it's called what we call a blind score. They go into the charts, they look at the charts, they score the charts, they make sure the question spacing is proper, that the questions are asked properly, and that everything is done the way it should be done. Then they do the mathematical score themselves, and then they run the scoring algorithm, the computer. And in this case, on every test that we ran on John Wilson, everybody was in agreement that he was telling the truth when he answered each one of those questions. So just a couple examples of the questions that I asked John Wilson, and this is a report that I prepare after each test. The first question here that I asked him was to determine if Wilson, prior to 2019, read the athletic profile that Rick Singer prepared for his son in 2014. He answered no to that question, and he passed that question. Another example of a question that I asked him is to determine if Wilson verified with the USC coach, a separate USC administrator, and his tax advisors that making donations through Rick Singer's organization was legitimate. The question there was answered yes, that he did do that, and he passed that test as well. Did you agree with Singer to put any fraudulent materials into any of your children's college application documents? Mr. Wilson's reply was no, and there were no signs of deception to that question. Did you bribe or direct anyone else to bribe any college official to violate their college admissions policies? Mr. Wilson's reply was no, and there were no signs of deception to that question. Next question. At the time you paid money to Singer, did you know Singer's college application process was illegal? Mr. Wilson's reply was no, and there were no signs of deception to that question. Did a senior USC athletic administrator tell you that your donations through Singer's organizations were appropriate? Mr. Wilson's reply was yes, and there were no signs of deception to that question. Before college, did your son play water polo for top 10 to 20 nationally ranked teams? Mr. Wilson's answer was yes, and he showed no signs of deception on that question. Did Singer tell you that contributions to his charitable organization were totally passed through to the university programs? Mr. Wilson's reply was yes, and there were no signs of deception to that question. There's no way that John Wilson was trying to beat this test. And again, not only from my view when I read it, but the other two independent quality reviews were looking for the same thing. And if they can tell themselves by looking at if there's been any countermeasure attempts, if there had been any, they would have identified that. Based on the polygraph test that I gave John Wilson, the polygraph test, plural, that I gave John Wilson, I would have to put him in the same category as I explained earlier about Brian Kelly. I was absolutely convinced that Brian Kelly was not a spy because he passed my polygraph test. Everybody expected him to fail. When I tested John Wilson, I felt the exact same way. I know that he passed each one of those tests, and I know that there's no way he could have passed those tests if he wasn't telling the truth. On December the 28th of 2021, I conducted 5 additional polygraph exams on John Wilson. The first exam asked to determine if Wilson participated in the September 28th, 2018 FaceTime call with Rick Singer. Mr. Wilson replied yes to those questions, and he passed the polygraph test, indicating there was no deception. The second test I gave him was to determine if Rick Singer met separately with Wilson's daughters during a portion of the September 28, 2018 phone call. Mr. Wilson replied yes. The results indicated that he was showing no deception to that question and was telling the truth on his answer. The third polygraph test I gave was to determine if Rick Singer reiterated to Wilson and his wife that their daughters could participate on teams in a variety of support roles during the September 28th phone call. Mr. Wilson responded yes, and it was determined after review of those polygraph results that he was telling the truth and showed no deception when he answered yes to that question. The next test I gave Mr. Wilson was to determine if Wilson learned that all FBI agents and prosecutors allegedly left Rick Singer alone while he made the September 28 FaceTime call. Mr. Wilson responded yes to those questions, and it was determined that he was telling the truth, showing no deception to that response, and passed the polygraph test. In conclusion, I would like to say that it is my opinion, as well as the opinion of 2 other polygraph experts, that Mr. Wilson replied truthfully and honestly to all these questions, and that it was everyone's opinion that he showed no signs of deception to any of the questions that were asked.